Welcome back, everybody. This time, we're going deep on sampling in research.
Ooh, sampling.
Yeah. Like how do researchers actually pick the right people or data points when they want to learn about a bigger picture?
Right.
And we've got some really cool excerpts from a couple of academic textbooks on research methods to help us break this down.
Nice.
Yeah. So, whether you're doing research yourself or just trying to understand, how other people do it, this stuff is super important.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, think about it. You can't always study everyone, right?
Right. Exactly.
So understanding how that smaller group, the sample, is chosen, that's super key to figuring out if the research is actually any good and if you can apply what they find to other situations.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. So the different ways to pick a sample, what's good and bad about each one, and the real world stuff that researchers run into when they're trying to actually put these techniques into practice.
Yeah, the goal is to give you the tools, so you can really look at research with a critical eye.
Yes.
Spot those potential biases and really understand how those sampling decisions, impact whether the research is valid and you can actually use it for something.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the first things we always see in research methods is this big distinction between probability and purposive sampling.
Right. Two totally different approaches.
Totally different, yeah.
With very different goals and ways they're used.
So let's start with probability sampling.
Okay, so probability sampling, it's all about creating a sample that accurately reflects the larger group you're interested in.
Got it.
Imagine a researcher studying voting patterns in a city.
Okay.
They can't interview every single voter, right?
Oh, no way.
So they use a probability sampling technique to pick a smaller group of voters, but this group needs to be statistically representative.
Representative, okay. So that means every voter in the city has a fair chance of ending up in that smaller group.
Exactly. Drawing names out of a hat.
I love that analogy, yeah.
Make sure everyone has an equal shot.
It's fair.
Right. And the cool thing about probability sampling is that it lets researchers, kind of make predictions about the whole population based on what they see in that smaller sample.
So by checking out the voting choices of just that sample group,
right,
the researchers can get a pretty good idea of how the whole city's probably going to vote.
Exactly. And the bigger the sample and the more accurately it reflects the whole population, the more confident the researchers can be.
Got it.
That their findings are actually on point.
Okay. But I bet it's not always easy to get a totally random sample. Right?
Oh, it can be a real challenge.
What kind of stuff do researchers run into?
Well, one big one is getting a list of everyone in that population.
Like a master list.
Yeah, it's called a sampling frame.
Okay.
So think about those voters in the city.
Right.
The researchers would need a complete and accurate list of all the registered voters.
Okay. And what if they don't have that list or it's missing people?
Well, then it gets tricky, right?
Yeah.
They might have to use incomplete voter registration data, and that could introduce bias into the sample.
This is certain groups of voters might be more or less likely to be registered, right?
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
So you might end up with too many or too few people from certain groups in your sample.
And that messes everything up.
It can really skew the results.
Right. Okay. So that's one problem.
Yeah. And then there's something like non-response bias.
Non-response. Is that when people just don't answer the survey?
Exactly. So even if you have a perfectly random sample, the people who actually participate, they might not represent the whole group you originally selected.
Oh, I see.
Because the reasons why they don't respond, those could be linked to the very things you're studying.
Ooh, that's tricky.
Yeah. So imagine you're studying health behaviors.
Okay.
And the people who are less health conscious, they're the ones who are less likely to fill out your survey.
Oh, yeah. That would totally mess up the results.
It would totally skew them.
Wow. Okay, so researchers have to be really careful about all this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. They use all sorts of strategies to try and deal with these challenges.
Like what?
They might use different ways to collect data, offer incentives to get people to participate, or even statistically adjust for those who don't respond.
That sounds complicated.
It can be, but it highlights just how tricky probability sampling can be.
Right. It's not as simple as it sounds at first.
Not at all.
All right. So let's switch gears a bit and talk about purposive sampling.
Okay. So purposive sampling.
It's a whole different ballgame, right?
Totally. Here, researchers actually pick participants based on specific criteria, things that are important to their research question.
Okay.
And the goal is not to generalize to the whole population.
Right, I get that.
It's to really deeply understand something happening within a specific group.
So it's instead of trying to figure out what everyone thinks, They're zooming in on a particular group of people
All right.
and trying to learn as much as they can about their experiences.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about a researcher who wants to study, say, the experiences of first-generation college students.
Okay, so not just any college student, but those who are the first in their family to go to college.
Exactly. They might choose people from all sorts of backgrounds within that group.
Like different majors, maybe different income levels.
Right, all to understand the variety of experiences within that specific population.
So it's all about depth.
Depth over breadth, that's purposive sampling.
Got it. And this is more common in qualitative research, right?
Yeah, you see it a lot there.
Where it's all about like interviews and focus groups.
Exactly. Getting those rich, detailed stories.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific types of purposive sampling.
Sure.
Starting with convenience sampling, because that sounds pretty straightforward.
It's all about practicality, right?
Yeah.
Researchers pick people who are easy to reach.
Okay.
Like students in their own classes,
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
colleagues in their department, or even folks who answer online surveys.
So, sounds convenient,
Super convenient.
but I'm guessing there's some downsides.
There always are, right?
What are we looking at here?
The biggest issue is bias.
Okay. Yeah, bias is always a problem in research.
The sample might not reflect the larger group you're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's limited to those who happen to be, accessible to the researcher.
Right.
Like if you're studying stress levels among college students, but you only survey students in your own classes,
Yeah.
well, those findings might not apply to students at other schools or even in other majors at the same school.
It's a very specific group.
Exactly.
You can't assume everyone's the same.
Right, so the ease of convenience sampling
Mm-hmm.
often comes at the cost of not being able to generalize your findings.
Got it. So what about quota sampling? I've heard that one used a lot in market research.
Oh yeah, quota sampling, it's a bit more structured than convenience sampling. Here, researchers are aiming to include a specific number of participants from different subgroups within the population.
Okay, so like they might set quotas based on age, gender, ethnicity.
Exactly, to make sure their sample reflects the diversity of the larger population.
So it's like they're trying to build a mini version of the whole population in their sample.
Exactly. Like, imagine a market researcher who's studying how people feel about a new product.
Yeah.
They might set quotas to make sure they interview a certain number of people from different age groups, income levels, and places they live.
That makes sense. Trying to get a broad range of opinions.
Right, but how do they actually choose the individuals within those quotas?
Yeah. How do they decide who to talk to?
That's where it gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah, okay.
They might just use convenience sampling within each quota,
Oh, I see.
which still has the potential for bias.
So like they could stand outside a mall and just approach anyone who looks like they fit a certain age group until they fill that quota.
That's one approach. But you can see how that could be pretty subjective.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right, like judging people based on how they look.
And that introduces bias.
Exactly.
It seems like there's always this like tension between being practical and getting a representative sample.
That's a really good observation. Researchers always have to weigh the pros and cons of different techniques and make choices that work for their research question and, the resources they have.
That makes sense. All right, let's talk about one more technique. Snowball sampling.
Snowball sampling.
Sounds kind of fun.
It's a cool one. This is especially useful when you're studying groups that are kind of hard to find or get in touch with.
Ooh, like a secret society?
Huh, kind of.
Okay, give me an example.
Like a community of artists who specialize in a super niche art form.
Okay, I like that.
Or people who have a very rare medical condition.
Got it. So it's hard to find those people. There's no like list of them.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does it work?
So in snowball sampling, researchers start by finding just a few people who fit their criteria, and then they ask those people to refer others who might also be eligible for the study.
Oh, so it's like a chain reaction.
Exactly.
Word of mouth.
The sample grows organically through those referrals, like a snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger.
Love that visual.
It's a great way to study groups where there's no list,
Right.
but it relies heavily on those initial contacts.
And their willingness to help you out.
Exactly.
It seems like trust is a big deal in this type of sampling.
It's huge. Researchers really need to build rapport with those first participants.
To get them to like open up their network.
Exactly. So they'll feel comfortable referring others.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've covered a bunch of different probability and non-probability sampling techniques.
We've covered a lot of ground.
I know. And each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, things to watch out for.
For sure.
Now, let's move on to the last category we want to discuss. Purposive sampling.
Purposive sampling.
This is where researchers get to be really picky, right?
They do. It's all about hand-picking participants who can offer the most insightful information.
For their specific research question?
Exactly. It's like a chef selecting the best ingredients for a dish.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Each ingredient brings something unique to the table.
Yeah, they all have a purpose.
Exactly. And in purposive sampling, the researcher is like that chef.
Okay.
Carefully choosing individuals who can give them unique perspectives.
Based on their lived experiences.
Exactly. Experiences related to whatever they're studying.
Got it.
So, for instance, let's say a researcher is looking at the impact of a new educational program.
Okay.
They might purposely choose participants who represent different learning styles,
Interesting.
different socioeconomic backgrounds, and even different levels of achievement from before the program.
So they're trying to get a really well-rounded view of how the program works for different types of learners.
Exactly. They might even pick people who have been super successful in the program, or those who have struggled.
So they can see the full spectrum of experiences.
Exactly, to get that complete picture of the program's impact.
Makes sense. It sounds like purposive sampling really depends on the researcher's knowledge and judgment.
It really does, yeah. They need to deeply understand the topic.
Right, and know who to talk to get the most meaningful information.
Exactly.
And I'm guessing the sample sizes are usually smaller with purposive sampling.
Often, yeah.
Because you're not trying to generalize to a huge population.
Right, it's about depth, not breadth.
Got it. Wow, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've talked about the big differences between probability and purposive sampling.
Two very different approaches.
Yeah, we've looked at all sorts of techniques.
So many different ways to choose your sample.
I know. And we've even talked about some of the real-world challenges that researchers face when they're trying to pick the right sample.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but
Yeah.
it's so important.
Absolutely.
Because picking the right sampling method is crucial for making sure that research findings are valid and applicable.
It's the foundation of good research.
And as people who read and use research, we need to be aware of these choices.
Right. Oh, definitely.
We need to think critically about how the sampling method might have affected the results.
Exactly. Just because a study used a certain sampling method, it doesn't automatically mean it's trustworthy.
Or that you can apply the findings to everyone.
Right. You got to ask those tough questions like, who was included in the sample? Who might have been left out? Could the sampling method have introduced any bias?
Ooh, good question.
Important ones.
Yeah, and by understanding these sampling principles, we can be smarter about the research we encounter.
Absolutely. We can evaluate its strengths and weaknesses and interpret the findings in a more critical and informed way.
It's all about being savvy research consumers.
Exactly.
You know, it's amazing how much sampling affects everything in the research process. Like from the data you collect to the conclusions you draw.
It really is a fundamental part of it all.
It's like the backbone of the whole research process.
It's the foundation.
And even though it often gets overlooked, its impact is undeniable.
It shapes everything.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to stop toward now.
Okay.
We've laid the groundwork for understanding sampling.
The basics are there.
And in the next part, we'll dive into some even more specialized techniques and really explore the nuances of this crucial research tool.
That's good.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you in part 2.
See you then. All right, so picking up where we left off with purposive sampling.
Yeah, purposive sampling.
There's this really interesting technique called theoretical sampling.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. It's like more about actually developing theories rather than just testing them, right?
That's a great way to put it, yeah. Theoretical sampling, it's this iterative process, used a lot in grounded theory research where the researcher is collecting data and analyzing it at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
And then they use those emerging themes to guide them in gathering even more data.
So it's like they're constantly adjusting their course based on what they're finding.
Exactly. It's very dynamic.
Cool.
Like imagine a detective, trying to solve a mystery.
Okay, love a good detective analogy.
Each new clue they find, it points them in a slightly different direction.
Oh, I see. So the research question is kind of evolving as they go.
Exactly.
Okay, so give me an example of how this might work in practice.
Sure. Let's say a researcher wants to study burnout among healthcare professionals.
All right. Big topic these days.
Huge, right. So they might start by interviewing a few nurses who have said they're experiencing burnout.
Okay, makes sense.
And as they analyze those interviews, certain themes might start to pop up. Like Maybe long work hours, dealing with a lot of emotional stress, or not feeling supported by their colleagues.
Yeah, all classic burnout stuff.
Right. So based on those themes, the researcher might then decide to specifically seek out participants who represent different specialties within healthcare or different work settings or levels of experience to see if those same themes hold true across different contexts.
So they're not just sticking with nurses. They're branching out.
Exactly.
To get a broader understanding of burnout in healthcare.
Precisely. The sample grows and changes as the theory develops.
I love that. It's so dynamic.
It is. The researcher's constantly learning and refining their understanding.
Based on the data they're gathering.
Exactly. It's a beautiful thing.
It really shows how research isn't always linear.
Oh, absolutely not.
It can be messy and full of surprises.
That's the fun part. Now, stepping back and looking at all these sampling techniques we've talked about.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
It's important to remember that there's no one perfect method.
Right. They all have their pros and cons.
Exactly. Each approach comes with its own strengths, limitations, and potential biases.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Perfect analogy. You wouldn't use a hammer to tighten a screw, right?
Exactly. So how do researchers decide which sampling method to use?
Well, they have to think carefully about their research question.
Okay.
The characteristics of the people or data they're interested in.
And the resources they have available.
Time, money, all that stuff. Exactly. And as people who are reading and using research, we need to be aware of those choices too.
Right, because the sampling method can really affect the results.
It can make a big difference.
So we need to think critically about how those choices might have shaped the findings.
Exactly. Just because a study used a particular sampling method, it doesn't automatically make it credible or generalizable.
Right. We can't just take it at face value.
We've got to ask questions.
Like what kinds of questions?
Like who was actually included in the sample? Who might have been left out? And could the sampling method have introduced any bias?
Oh, that's good. Those are important things to consider.
They are really key questions.
And by understanding these principles of sampling,
right,
we can be more informed and discerning consumers of research.
Absolutely.
Able to really evaluate the strengths and weaknesses.
And interpret the findings with a critical eye.
You know, it's amazing how much sampling impacts every aspect of the research process.
It really does touch everything.
It shapes the data we collect, the analyses we do, and the conclusions we draw.
It's fundamental.
And yet, it's often something that people don't even think about.
It's easy to overlook.
But its impact is undeniable, right?
Absolutely. It's there, whether we're aware of it or not.
It's like the silent partner in every research study.
A powerful silent partner.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of sampling.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
I hope our listeners come away with a new appreciation for just how complex and nuanced this research tool really is.
Me too. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is.
And understanding sampling, it's not just for researchers, you know.
Right. It's for anyone who wants to understand research.
Anyone who wants to be an informed consumer of information.
Exactly. So whether you're reading a scientific article, evaluating a market research report, or even just trying to make sense of data in your everyday life.
These principles of sampling can really help you understand that information better.
It's all about becoming more aware, right?
Yes. Aware of the choices researchers make.
The potential for bias and the limits of generalizability.
Exactly.
And ultimately, it's about being empowered to ask the right questions.
Challenge assumptions.
And demand more rigor in the research we encounter.
Because in a world that's overflowing with data,
it's true, data is everywhere.
Understanding sampling, it's not just a research skill.
It's a life skill.
It's a survival skill. It's how we navigate this information landscape with a critical eye.
And a discerning mind.
Exactly. All right, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought as we wrap up this deep dive.
Oh, yes, please do. Lay some wisdom on us.
The next time you come across a research study, don't just accept the findings at face value.
Don't just believe everything you read.
Right. Take a moment and think about that sampling method.
Put on your critical thinking cap.
Exactly. Ask yourself, does this sample truly represent the group they're trying to study? Could there be any hidden biases? And how might those sampling choices have actually shaped the results?
Those are great questions.
They are powerful questions, and they can really help us become more critical thinkers, not just passive consumers of information.
And that, I think, is really the heart of the deep dive.
It is. It's about Empowering our listeners to engage with knowledge in a thoughtful and informed way.
Yeah, it's like we're giving our listeners this behind-the-scenes look at how research actually works.
Pulling back the curtain.
Exactly, showing them all the decisions that go into it.
And just like with any creative process,
Yeah.
there are choices to be made, compromises,
Right.
and you're always trying to do the best you can with the resources you have.
Right, and sometimes it's about acknowledging that no research is perfect.
Absolutely.
Every study has limitations.
Being upfront about those limitations,
Yeah.
that's a sign of good research.
It's about recognizing that there might be bias, that you can't always generalize the findings to everyone,
Right.
and that, studying people is complex.
Humans are messy.
There's always going to be some uncertainty,
For sure.
but that shouldn't stop us from engaging with research, right?
Oh, definitely not.
It should make us more curious,
Yes.
more critical.
More willing to ask questions.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, research is all about discovery.
It's a journey.
And understanding sampling, it's like having a map
A compass.
to help us navigate all this information.
It's a good way to put it.
It reminds us that research is done by people.
Real people making real choices.
And by understanding those choices,
Yeah.
we can better decide if the findings are actually trustworthy and if we can apply them to other situations.
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the basics of probability and purposive sampling
The foundations.
to the more nuanced world of theoretical sampling.
Right. And the ever-present challenge of bias.
Always got to watch out for bias.
It's everywhere. We've looked at so many different techniques.
I know, it's kind of mind-blowing how many there are.
It is. From simple convenience sampling to the more complex, stratified, random sampling.
And we've seen how each approach gives us a different perspective.
A different lens to view the world.
So, as we wrap up this exploration,
Yeah.
I want our listeners to walk away feeling empowered.
Empowered, I like that.
Understanding sampling isn't about becoming like a statistics whiz.
No, not at all.
It's about developing that critical thinking mindset.
Asking those tough questions.
Being skeptical, but in a good way.
Healthy skepticism.
Yeah, and being willing to question the assumptions behind the research.
Assumptions are sneaky.
And remember, knowledge is always changing.
It's not static.
We're constantly learning new things.
And we all have a role to play in shaping that knowledge.
By engaging with research.
Thoughtfully and critically.
So next time you're reading anything that presents research findings,
Whether it's a news article, a scientific study, or even just a survey.
take a second to think about the sampling method. How did they choose those participants?
Who was included? Who might have been left out? And how could those choices have affected what they found?
Those questions can really open your eyes.
They can make you a more informed and discerning consumer of information.
That's the goal.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder these ideas and explore the world of research with a newfound appreciation for the power of sampling.
It's a powerful tool.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, stay curious.
Do not forget to like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future videos.